Welcome. You've made it through March, almost. And in fact, March is heralded as Women's History Month. And somehow that's very potent for tonight's program. Because as we all know, mothers, daughters, the legacy of our relationship with our family in some way is often defined by our relationship either as with our daughters or with mothers. Not that I'm discounting all you guys. But tonight, we're going to take a special look at women and mothers and daughters and the kind of role. And I want to thank Nandana for bringing this really creative idea, because I think the poetry that we're going to hear, and she'll tell you a little bit more, but the idea that those relationships are in some ways defined by poetry, by the stories that I think we'll hear more of from Vishakha, and that Preeti Vasudevan's dance also gives text, gives a story, a context, and that's quite powerful. I'm going to just take a moment to read part of the bios of our three distinguished personages, and we have more online, but just to give you a little bit of an idea of who's here. Nandana Dev Sen has authored 6 children's books, translated into more than 15 languages, and starred in 20 feature films from 4 continents. Along the way, she has been a book editor, a screenwriter, an interpreter for refugees, an advocate for child protection, and Princess Jasmine in Disneyland. Giving you a moment to think about that. There are many, many awards, but tonight, to be able to hear the poetry of her mother is really powerful. Vishakha Desai, who is a very dear friend, former president of the Asia Society, in some ways always here in spirit, is a noted scholar of South Asian art and history and leadership, contemporary Asian art. Her history here at the Asia Society has been amazing. She was a senior advisor to Columbia Global Thought and is currently a senior fellow on the committee of Global Thought. And believe me, we need global thought. And we're really delighted. And her book, World as Family, is incredibly moving. In fact, Acrobat, I didn't mention, Nandana's book about her mother's poetry, translated from Bangla. Both of these books are available for you at the end of the evening, and they have graciously agreed to sign them, so you don't want to leave without them if you don't have them already. And Preeti Vasudevan is an award-winning cultural storyteller, thought leader, and dancer, critically acclaimed choreographer, provocative, unconventional storytelling, and a very dear friend as well. So we're really delighted to have all 3 of them. And we're delighted to have you here at the Asia Society. I think at this time in the history of the world, connecting globally and locally is critical. And we're here in community, and that community is both immediate and much larger than that. So I think in some ways that's what this evening speaks to. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you a little later. Thank you.
These beloved faces. I can no longer bear to watch my loved ones wilt with age. With my eyes wide open, I can't bear to see these beloved faces melt like clouds as pond scum thickens around the pools of their eyes. The brows collapse like a dead bird's wings. The lips dry up in the dust, like unripe fruit plucked by storms. How everything dries, how everything flies away in the wind, like scraps of paper, how everything disappears. How the heart folds up its tent and steps into the road, readying itself to raise a hand and hail a car for hire, to raise that hand, to say goodbye and go. The heart retreats and folds, as I now see. It takes all shining pots and pans from the rack and shatters them on cold stone with a deafening crash. How, in the heat of the sun, all sounds fade away, all traces vanish. Those beloved faces, like clouds, change their form and float away. With my eyes wide open, I can't bear to see the burnt grass in the yard, so close to me. মাদারি ভেবেছে সে খুব সুন্দর মাদারি খেলা জানে। দু হাতে সময়কে নিয়ে লোফালুফি, এখন তখন দুটোই নাচাবে দুমুঠোতে, হেঁটে যাবে দড়ির ওপরে। ভেবেছে সে সব কিছু পারে। জীবনে একবারই শুধু দড়ি কেঁপে ওঠে। Acrobat. She thought she knew acrobatics rather well, that she could juggle time with both hands, play with the now right next to the then. She would make both dance, she thought, fist to fist, and she would glide so smooth along the tight rope. She thought she could do absolutely anything at all. Only once in your life will the rope shiver. Broken home. Once again you glow on the brink of love. Once again, you're dazzling in heartbreak. Is it for the sake of poetry, then, that once again you're hunting for pain? Do you break your home just for poetry? Time and again. Face to face. There are one or two faces whose eyes I can't bear to meet. When I stand before them, I feel I forgot to brush my teeth or wipe away the traces of dirt from my cheek. Because some loving faces shine just like a mirror. I can see me in them vividly, closer than even myself, and clearer. This child, one day, this child too will die. This child, pure as milk, whom I've brought into this world with all my heart's desire and with fervent prayer. If she asks me now, on what promise have you thrust me into this strange and dazzling world? What grand celebration must I attend? I will be petrified, choking with fear, with ignorance. I will run away to a dark cave, numb and empty. What answer will I give you? Catch of the day. I want to chop it up, slice it into pieces, grind it into a paste, season it, then shut it in the oven. They didn't win. The sun, the rain, the earth. It's still all raw inside, floundering like a catfish, still alive, freshly caught. My youth. Growing up lesson. Boy, are you scared of bloodshed? Are you terrified of plucking virginity? If the taste of blood goes to your head, do you fear that it will be a calamity? The truth is, whether wrong or right, your blood calls out to you each night. Listen, boy, it's time for you to grow. Words can be as fierce, don't you know? The treachery that lingers on tongue tips, beyond the world that all your dreams show, know that blood can be easily shed by lips. Take back the night. Man, in the twilight, I could still hear the lark. Woman, the night was moonless, oppressively dark. Man, in the flowering woods, a night fairy walked. Woman, in the Sundarbans, the man-eater stalked. Man, in that fragrant springtime air, woman, blood-drenched remains lay there. Right now, forever. Time has not the power to extinguish me. Don't think for a moment that I wait upon time. Let time keep on playing his absurd battle game. every time he strips me, I rise clothed without shame. With the force of prayer, of spells magic and divine, all that was untimely will turn auspicious, sublime. In a just war, the rebel stands forever unafraid, for her ally is eternity, who, divinely arrayed, guides her chariot, destroying the enemy line. Thus, a divisive age will be defeated and spurned. Though it brings on great wars, it will lose every time. From all our scriptures, this is the truth I have learned. Please know that I am cherished by an undivided, infinite age. Time will never have the power to scorch me with its rage.
Well, we promised you a multidimensional, multisensorial experience. And you think you got it? I think give it up, please, for Nandana and Preeti. Having been a dancer before, I almost feel like I shouldn't talk anymore because there's nothing more to say. But we have stories to tell. So I'm really thrilled that all of you are here, especially on this last day of the International Women's Month. Tomorrow is April Fool's Day, so it's better to start and stop right here. I have to say that when Nandana and I first started talking about a program that did not involve dance, it was just us talking.
Right.
And a big shout out to Carolyn Mackinson, who actually thought about putting us together.
Yes, it was her idea.
Exactly. So all good ideas come from other places. We just kind of make it happen.
In my life, many of them come from Caroline.
There you
yes.
go. There you go. What occurred to us was that there's something very special about Nandana's mother, Navanita, my mother, Nirmala, and two of us, because among four of us, we cover pretty much the whole 20th century. My mother was born in the early part of the 20th century, 1914 to be exact. Navanita, born in 1938, pre-independence, but in the later stage of independence. Then I come along right after independence, and Nandana is the baby. So among four of us, what we thought was really interesting is that both of our mothers were really quite special in their own time. And you'll find out why as we talk about it. But the second part is that they were special against the conventions of the time, what was thought to be appropriate or proper, and how they actually stood against that. And how that happened, why that happened, is partly what I read about in my story, World as Family, and it comes through in Namanita's poems that actually Nandana has so beautifully translated. So part of the reason for this conversation was really both of us reflecting on our mothers and how to do that, where to go, what to do is what you're going to get especially. And I know, Nandana, you felt that there was something special as well.
Everything that you said, and I think there are also such clear and really moving resonances between our stories, between the lives of the mothers that we had and our grandmothers as well. I think they belonged to, they were really fearless in their generations, and they set trends in their own lives in a way that was quite extraordinary. And I think also just, even though you're much, much, much younger than my mother, there's such similarities in terms of the choices you made. Both of you came to America as teenagers. Both of you fell in love and got married very early. Both of you were raised by extremely idealistic parents who had also fallen in love at an age where those love marriages didn't really happen, and they were very politically active. And then even the way you described your house, it just made me laugh, because I grew up in this big, beautiful house called Bhalobasha Bari, which many of you have visited, I think. And we kept getting chased out of rooms by books, because the beds would fill up, and then we would just. Thankfully, it's a big
familiar.
room. I know. I read that,
Absolutely.
and I thought, my goodness, this is a strange little story, but it's exact. It feels like I'm reading about my own house, and also the constant gatherings that happened of political activists and artists and poets that were happening in both our houses. One in Kolkata, one in Ahmedabad. It was really lovely to see all of those resonances across the generations.
Right.
So I'm really so thrilled that we're having
I think
this
what's so
conversation.
interesting is that most people might not actually know, or some of you may do, is that actually Calcutta and Ahmedabad, or Bengal and Gujarat, also had connections, in the sense of both the Shantiniketan was a big influence in the school that I went to. And then we even learned Ami Tomar Bhalobashi, a Bengali song, which in a Gujarati medium school was kind of not really thought about. And we all read translations of Bengali novels. So that was also part of the connection that happens. I think one of the things that you just mentioned that's really important is that your mother also had a strong mother. And I think that's also true in case of my mother, who also had a strong mother. So I'd love for you to actually begin with the mother's mothers. The
That's a lovely
grandmother.
idea.
And you have a wonderful poem called The Lamp, which I think is just so very special.
Actually, that may be my favorite poem of all the poems my mom wrote. And I think it became my favorite poem because as I was translating it, it became about my mother and me rather than about my grandmother and me, which is grandmother and my mother, which is, of course, the way it was written. It's a poem my mother wrote about my grandmother. I guess it just shows that we're all destined to become our mothers at some point. But I did feel like this scene has happened in my life so many times. The Lamp, memories on my mother's birthday. Go to sleep now, Ma. It's way past 11. 11? It's still early then, but you must go to bed. You're teaching tomorrow. Ma sits in her easy chair, thick glasses perched on her thin nose, pale fingers clutching her magnifying glass. The statesman spread out across her lap. Next to her, on the table, her flask of tea, her medicines, her fragrant betel leaf in its silver case, her brass spittoon, her cash box, behind her on the teapoy, an earthen vase filled with her favorite white tuberoses, and a wicker table lamp weaved in agortala. Before her, the alarm clock ticking away, her traveling timepiece. As Ma turns the pages of the newspaper, its noisy crackle splinters the quiet night. Closing my book, I come to her. As soon as I step inside, I drown in the deep perfume of those tuberoses. The nurse is dozing in her chair. Ma, please go to sleep now. It's 1:30. 1:30? She scolds. And you're still awake? Don't you have college tomorrow? Swallowing the rebuke, I keep on wheedling. You will get sick, Ma, if you stay up like this. You must take care of your body. My body? Ma breaks into laughter that sparkles, like jewelry shimmering from head to toe. How much more sick can it get? And what use is my body anyway? I go to her one more time before I sleep. It's 2:30, Ma, do call it a night. Come, let me take you to your bed. Yes, I'm coming. I'm just coming. There's only this one tiny bit left. Reading isn't so easy now, you see. It's the gift of these cataracts. With a slight smile, embarrassed, apologetic, she buries herself again in printed words. Under the glowing light of the table lamp, with her focus on the magnifying glass, the ticking of the alarm clock fades away. As I walk back to my room, I hear her speaking softly to the nurse. No, my dear. No, don't turn off the light. Keep that lamp switched on, please. I have just one more page left. Just one more page left. One more paragraph. One more sentence. Give me one more word, dear nurse. Just one more day.
It's beautiful. You know, in that poem, what comes through is the relationship between the two of them. But also, I know that your grandmother herself was a very strong woman.
Indeed. In fact, there were such similarities between my grandmother and your mother in some ways, but your grandmother as well. But to talk about the first part, I was so struck by the fact that both my grandmother and your mother were destined to be child brides. My grandmother, sadly, didn't really escape it. She was married at 12 and then she was widowed at 13 and she became a self-taught poet who also became a best-selling poet, which is a rare species even today, as we know. So she went in a different direction and finally married my grandfather. But your mother, who was about to get married as a child, escaped that only because your grandmother, when I read that in your book, I was so not just amazed, but really, really blown away by the story. If you can tell us, I don't want to give too much away because it's such a beautiful story.
Well, I think first of all, one forgets that in the early part of the 20th century, it was quite common to be betrothed at 13 or 12, and then you might not get actually married until you reach puberty in 15 or 16.
Right.
So there's a lot more to say, but I will just read from the book,
please,
what happened. And that was that my mother, Nirmala, was engaged at the age of 13 to a young man from another prominent family in the same caste. She was expected to finish high school and get married soon thereafter. Then, as fate would have it, her mother, Ba, as all of us called her, and also her own children, discovered that the boy's family had a history of mental illness. Ba insisted on calling off the engagement against the wishes of her own husband. Forbidden to enter the meeting of caste elders, all men, of course, Ba stood by the door, covered her head, and pleaded her case. She was warned that such a radical move would risk the whole family being outcast and would jeopardize the chances of marriage for all her children. Bas stood firm and luckily won the argument. So the amazing thing is that imagine standing, not allowing to get into the door, to stand by the door and say, no, my daughter will not get married to this person. And then they tell her that if you do that, none of your kids might get married, because she was the oldest of, at that point, 4 kids. And she said, I'll take the risk. That is a pretty amazing thing when you think about the moment.
Yes, it is
In
absolutely.
my mother was born in 1914, so this is in the late 20s.
Right. It's unthinkable.
yeah.
And I think the image, when I read your book, of her standing, that she couldn't even quite enter it.
Right,
That was so
exactly.
not her space.
Right.
But commanding that space from being outside of it, making that decision. And I'm sure our grandmothers and our mothers' grandmothers had a great deal to do with the way, the choices we've made at many other times in our lives. I often think about what were the seminal moments that actually made me think very differently about a choice that I should or could make, or that something became a possibility for me. Your mother never wanted that marriage. She wanted to study, but she didn't think she had a choice.
Right.
It wasn't until your grandmother came and said no that she escaped that and very happily went off to study, which is what she wanted to do.
Well, and of course, remember that then she wanted to go to college.
Yeah.
And they finally said, okay, then you know what? Go to Ahmedabad. This was in Surat when her engagement is broken. And I actually realized a little bit later that partly why they did that is that they wanted her away from Surat. Because
From the guy. Oh,
exactly.
interesting.
And also, I do think that probably because the chatter in the traditional system was such that it was easier.
Right.
And she goes and lives in a hostel. I mean, in a girls' hostel, which mainly were all working women, but that in itself is unusual.
That's also very radical.
And so,
Extremely.
and one of her best friends was a child widow.
Oh, really?
And it's
How
because
interesting.
she was sent there, since they didn't want her to be in the house.
Well, that happened to my grandmother too.
Exactly.
She was sent out because she was seen as inauspicious, being a child widow. But and this whole thing that even within a family where such radical decisions could be taken by women, there were the continuation of traditions. There was also a very, very deep traditionalism, both, I feel, in your family and also in mine, where, women at different points in their lives really had to take a stand against it. I was so struck in a way because I feel like I know your mother from reading about her, so much about her and all the choices she made, and how stoic she was, and how completely idealistic she was, and how much she believed in the education and empowerment of women. And there's that letter in your book about how she felt, how worried she was to have yet another daughter. And I know, do you think you could read maybe that part?
I mean, I'm a third daughter, third child of 7 kids. Now, mind you, my mother was 31 when she got married, unheard of, to be that old, as it were, and my father was 33. So then they proceeded to have 7 kids, but I was the third child. So as it was tradition at the time, my mother would have gone to her mother's house to have the delivery. But I was the last one to do that. After that, everybody was born in Ahmedabad. So she writes to my father about 10 days after I'm born. And she says, I was trying to find the reason behind this birth of another girl. And I was confused. And I'm confused because, and she goes on before to say that by the convention of the society, we might be seen as being in a difficult bind, some people would even consider us unlucky. First, we began to have children very soon after marriage. Second, kids started arriving one after the other with little distance between them. Third, as if those were not enough, we got a third daughter, not even a boy. Fourth, we don't have much money. So others felt pity for us. As the baby girl arrived, I felt heaviness in my heart for a few days. Why did nature cause me to have a third girl? So that others could contribute this, yet another stroke of bad luck. Once again, people will fault me and say, too bad, another girl. And then in the end of that letter, she goes on to say that I was trying to find a reason, and initially I was confused. But then she goes on to say, today I feel there is a hidden hand of nature behind it. If we had a baby boy, everybody would be pleased. And I would have fallen for that external satisfaction. That's why what's happened is most appropriate. Many people pity us for having 3 children, especially all girls. But those thoughts are like drops of water on a lotus leaf. For the sake of these 3 children, I hope I don't let outside noise disrupt my inner balance and peace. I have to say, when I was reading this in Gujarati as I was preparing for this book, and I initially thought, really? You couldn't even just say, hey, I have a girl. And she's rationalizing, but she's really trying to work hard against the society to say, somehow I'm not going to let that social pressure come in my way. That was her way of kind of trying to understand how she's going to withstand that pressure. And yet this kind of predicament, it seems like for women is strong in a different way.
I also think understanding that things are a bit harder for, like you would worry about a girl child more than you
Right.
would worry about a boy child perhaps. And so that could have also been something that fed into this
Right.
thinking that she had. I mean, I do think anxiety about motherhood is something that was very deeply felt by my mother
Right?
as
And
well.
she wrote a wonderful poem. And I think you
She
should
wrote
read
a
that.
few
Yeah, a few poems, exactly. But the one that I was thinking about, and let's see if I can get that out. Puppet.
Oh, yeah, you know, so funny. She wrote that poem, I think the day after I was born, like the day after. So, and dedicated it to me. And it's, you know, it would have been lovely if it were about, joy, you know. Anyway, yeah, I'll read it to you in a moment. But just on that note, you know, we did another poem, Preeti and I, called This Child.
Oh, right.
And I'm just amazed by, at a time when really the role of the mother was, you couldn't imagine that a mother would say a sentence like, one day this child too will die. I mean, that itself is an extremely radical and, what should I say, it goes against every archetype of being a good mother that you have. But it was very typical of the way my mother thought and broke what the expectations were of how she would respond to being a mother, being a daughter, being a wife. The puppet, okay. Puppet to Nandana. I can't decide. Was it a mistake? Or is it better this way? Twice now, pretending to be a goddess, I've created humans out of my desire. Funnily enough, though, that's where the fake goddess act ends. After that, you revert to being a woman as before. Good and bad, dreams, sorrow, it's all beyond your will again. So, the puppet's dance will resume once more on a string. Practice makes perfect. always do your best. I look into the mirror. Do I know this face? Somewhere it lies hidden, that secret divine will. Or was it just a momentary spark, the celestial celebration of an instant, an act of pity by a humorist in the background, this cloud bursting, supernatural light?
You know, every time I hear that, and I feel for her, partly because she was such an individual person and had poetry was in her vein for a long, long time, so that she could actually put her feeling into that poem in a way that otherwise people would be afraid to say. So poetry gave her that courage. And that courage partly was also that she was a young person when she meets your father. And they get married, and it's very much a love marriage. And at the same time, that love has also tremendous sense of power, of emotions and rational, and how does that two work together. And I was sort of thinking about that when I was reading the poems, that in my parents' case, my father was the emotional one. He was the one who just poured his heart out. And it was a good thing that he was imprisoned a lot during the independence movement. I mean, he didn't commit other crimes, but essentially he was in and out of jail all the time.
Right.
And therefore, their relationship for 6-7 years was often through letters. And also because my mother went off to Surat, her hometown,
Right.
because her younger sister was sick and then eventually died. So those were the letters that I was working on when I was working on this book initially.
So wonderful to have those letters.
Yeah,
I don't have
it's
letters.
really quite
between my parents.
amazing.
Yeah.
Because my mother was a pet rat. I mean, she collected everything. And so little notes, big notes, letters that she wrote, letters that my father wrote from the prison, as well as things that she sent and didn't send. And it gave me some sense of who she was in a way.
Would you read something that gave you a sense of this?
Right. I mean, I think that one thing that we all as children thought that she was kind of a rock of Gibraltar. She was very rational and everything was under control. And, she was not going to let emotions come in the way.
Right.
Sometimes it felt kind of hard, but, that's what it was. So in their letters, and this is before they got married in 1945. And this is the beginning of their sort of budding relationship. And my father constantly is asking, but what is your idea? Are you really interested? While he was actually sort of involved with somebody else. And she was very cautious. But then she sort of starts, and then I will read you the letter that she didn't send. But in this letter, she says, you ask so many questions, so many that I'm actually scared to answer them, but I will. You do know answers to some of them, but you still ask. But you must have sensed that my worldview, as you've gotten to know me, because of my earlier circumstances, I had developed a rational sense of composure. But I came to realize that this was actually not the truth. Behind that mask of rational calmness, there was a lot of longing and dissatisfaction. But the other layer was so strong that others had no sense of that inner dissatisfied heart. And it was the first inkling I had that there was other stuff going on. And then I come across this tiny little note. It was not on a letter, it's just a little note. And it is on Diwali. The year is 1939. And it's about 6 months after she had written the first one. Yeah. And she says, At the touch of the moonlight, the ocean opens up. With the light of the sun, lotus flowers in full bloom, the touch of your feelings have opened up the leaves of my heart flower. Oh, my Lord, what can I wish for on this auspicious day? Tell me what I should hope for. The ocean tears down all the built walls as it charges forward. Today, the ocean of my heart is ready to break all barriers to run toward you. No one will ever be able to barricade it or destroy it. I have nothing to give you but my whole self, breaking all barriers. Tell me, what more can I offer you?
Goodness, so beautiful.
And
You had a mother, a poet mother as well. We were both raised by poet mothers.
And my
clearly.
father was the one who always read poetry.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this was ever sent. That's the truth. It's not in a letter.
You know, it's I know that feeling very well because there was a lot about my mother that I didn't understand, even though we were extremely close, extremely close. But I didn't understand why her marriage with my father didn't work, for instance. I didn't understand why it was such a difficult relationship with my grandmother, although it was also an extremely close relationship. I didn't fully understand why she was so dependent on poetry, the relationship that she had with poetry, which was so intense, and she relied on it, but she was also very aware of the destructive potential of language. So that was a fraught relationship. So there was all of these things, and then, so there were mysterious parts of her that suddenly became clear to me through her poetry after she was no longer in my life. I understood, it was sort of like when I was doing this book, I knew all her poems really well. So it's not like I suddenly read new poetry. But when I was making this book, bringing it together, and I was putting all the poems in order and reading them, it kind of read like a journal. So there was this sort of personal history, many personal histories, I should say, that became clear to me through her poetry after her death, that I just did not understand before, including her relationship with my father.
Right. And in fact, the poem Out of Reach was the poem that made me think of the letter
Oh, how lovely.
in a way from a reverse side.
How
Now,
lovely.
would you
I
read
see
that?
that. Yeah, I'd love to. It's called Bhalobasha Baro in Bangla. It's very short, so I'll share the Bangla with you also so you can hear the cadence of it. My mother loved writing in rhymes, and she was very brilliant at rhymes and rhythms. And I made a promise to myself that any poem she had written in rhyme, I would translate in rhyme. So it sometimes took a while, but anyway, so this is one of those poems. Bhalobasha Baro. Tumi cheyechile, this is the other thing that I noticed. I know all her Bengali poetry by heart, but I don't know any of my English translations of them by heart. Yeah, those I have to read.
Talk about that.
Yeah. তুমি চেয়েছিলে নিরুপাধি প্রেম অনধিগম্য আমি গেঁথে আনি লবঙ্গলতা তোমারই জন্য তুমি বুঝি চাও প্রেমের বাতাস নাতিশীতোষ্ণ আমি বইয়ে দি কাল বৈশাখী ভয়াল কৃষ্ণ তোমার প্রণয় প্রযুক্ত নয় দূর বিশুদ্ধ আমার প্রণয় কিছুটা প্রণয় কিছুটা যুদ্ধ. You asked for a nameless love, out of reach. I weaved you a wreath of blooms, each to each. You want love's temperate breeze, softly sighing. I blow you a thunderstorm, terrifying. Your love is detached, afar, chaste to its core. My love is in part love and in part war.
Yeah, it's beautiful. You know, the reason why I thought of that poem is because one of the letters my father says something about, he feels like a waterfall. And my mother writes to him and says, I know you want a waterfall, and all I can give you is a trickle. And it was that idea of emotional, the two very different kind of people.
Right.
And I think that the only thing that I know about my parents is that because they were not married until they were so older, and they were together for 7, 8 years, that it kind of allowed them to create the yin yang that actually worked. And I'm kind of rereading, but you know, it feels a little bit like your parents met young, and she was very young, and then it was this idea of the rock and distant, and
Yeah.
you know, yeah,
That's right. They were very young, and they were, children still. They were growing up.
Yeah.
Whereas my grandmother and grandfather, it was similar to your parents. They married when they were in their, it was very similar actually, because my grandmother was 30, and my grandfather was a freedom fighter, like your, like your father, who had decided not to marry, and then of course they fell in love, and that was the end. That was the end of that resolution. But and so it was, but it's interesting also because it sounds like in your mother's own way, she responded to your father through poetry. Even to say, you want a waterfall, I can give you a trickle, is poetry. She was bringing him close and also keeping him at bay through poetry, which is one of those skills that I think poets, women poets, learn how to do, learn to master. Yeah.
Thinking about marriage is broken, love in separation, which is different. Viraha is not exactly divorce, right?
Right.
But there is still that idea of what happens, and especially in your mother's case, she goes back to Calcutta after having been abroad for a long time. And there's a wonderful poem that she actually writes about that. And I'd love for you to read that.
I would love to read that, actually.
Yeah,
I think it's Return of the Dead,
yeah.
24. Just to say a few lines before this, when my mother left Kolkata to come to study at Harvard, the whole city was heartbroken because she was the darling of the literary, artistic, cultural world. She was this impossibly glamorous person who already had a book of poetry out. She was always the best student in the university, always, topped the classes, and had art exhibitions. She was also a visual artist, and then now was engaged to someone who was, a young star type. And so when she decided to go away, there was a lot of mourning in Kolkata, a lot of sadness.
It's only in Calcutta you can have
That's
a
true.
poet. We are sad because the poet is leaving,
That's right.
It doesn't happen in lots of places, yeah.
That's really true. Yeah. So there was a great deal of heartbreak. But then when my mother came back as a young divorced woman with 2 little girls, my Didi, my older sister, and me, and she moved back into my grandmother's home. So we grew up in this all-female family. The world didn't quite know how to respond to her, because even though divorces were legal, even in her circle of very kind of liberal, creative, artistic friends, it was not common at all. Return of the Dead. Receive me then, Kolkata. I am your true love, your whole world. I'm back from the war, an aborted mother. I have brought the ocean with me instead. My lap is empty, yes, but my breasts are heavy, overflowing with wasted milk. Look at the fathomless salt water in my eyes. Come then, look at me. See how virginity burns on my brow again, fiery as the setting sun. Touch me, for my newborn flesh belongs to you now. Receive me then, Kolkata, in your waiting arms. Your loneliness is over at last. I have returned just as you had wanted me to. Why this stunned silence then? This anxious glance, this daze? Lift your face. Don't shift your eyes. Speak to me. Look at me. Your prayers were heard. Here I am, returned from the dead. Yes, it's me. It's your childhood sweetheart, your world of passion, your old flame, your very own. Now, Bonita? So how was it like? I mean, you've gone, as I said, there's so many parallels I feel in your lives. Also, the fact that it was only after your first and very early marriages disintegrated that both my mother and you came into your own as feminist scholars and artists and really focus on that. But I just wonder, what was it like for you to come back when you had a similar moment of returning?
Yeah, I mean, I had actually two returns, right? First time was coming to America as a 16-year-old, as an
Right.
exchange student, living with an American family and going back at a time where very few Indians, especially girls, had ever gone.
Right.
And this is 1966, so I'm giving away my age, but doesn't really matter. I mean, the truth is that that was the first kind of a shock where I had changed, but my world hadn't changed, and they expected me to behave a particular way, and I didn't. Then I proceed to fall in love with an American in India, Peace Corps worker, get married. My parents, progressive as they were, tried to tell me not to get married. And in fact, my father says, listen, you want to go back to graduate school? Do it. You can live together.
Yeah, I thought that was amazing.
And my
for your
mother
dad to
says,
say
I
that.
mean, not live together, but just in the same city, you know. And my father said, no, 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 this is too important. You should do that. And my mother then proceeded to tell me that, remember, and I think you had mentioned that sentence that actually has stayed with me for such a long time. And she said, you know, marriage is not the period at the end of a sentence. It's a comma.
Yeah, it's so
There is a
beautiful.
life before and life after, and they have to connect. I, of course, didn't understand the profundity of that sentence, which she was trying to tell me that I know who you are now,
Right.
and you have to remember that, and that will have to carry forward.
Yeah.
And essentially, that marriage lasted 7 years, and I got married, turned 21, left India, and graduated the same summer. And then I got divorced at the age of 27. And then I go back to India to do my dissertation work. And at that point, my parents, I mean, it's a long story, but they were very, very supportive. However, everybody, all the relatives, and the number of friends, good friends, they kept saying, but what are you going to do? You're divorced and you're so young. Because there was not a single divorce anywhere, any place,
Right.
in any of my life. Multiple generations, you name it, it just wasn't there. And I kept thinking that, why are they so worried? And I realized it's because of the aspersions that actually the widows have, and also divorcees. Women who are married and divorced my God, their life is going to be over. And that's when I had to remember my mother's sentence, that there is a life before and life after. And that allowed me to actually move forward with the work that I had to do. And in that sense, I think you're right. I never thought about it as that I came into my own, because also it's a different time, right? I mean, now it's in the 70s, and times are different here, times are different there, but especially here. So I didn't think of that as a break. But clearly, my getting divorced, my finishing graduate school, and the career began right after that. So it's all part and parcel of that.
I think it's also fascinating that that your mother, who was your mother and my grandmother, were both early feminists, but they were also traditionalists.
Right, totally.
You know, they believed entirely in the empowerment of women and education. I mean, they did everything. Both of them went through great sacrifices to educate their daughters. But they were like, I remember when when my mother's marriage fell through, collapsed. My grandmother was very upset. She was so heartbroken that she couldn't actually comfort my mother.
Wow.
She somehow felt that it wasn't that she blamed my mother, but it was it reminded me of a part in your book when you were talking about your dance, of your Arangetram, where you made a mistake, but you did a wonderful performance, but there was a small, you didn't make a mistake. Your anklet fell off.
Yes.
And you were embarrassed, but it was still a fantastic performance. And the only thing that your mother said was why did that fall? Not how beautifully you did it and all of that. And it was that kind of tradition of tough love, that of being really stoic yourself, but also wanting to prepare your daughter for everything. And my grandmother was like that too. Thankfully, my mother was not like that. I got lots of cuddles from my mother.
But you know, the interesting thing when you think about that is your grandmother also went through some very serious,
Traumas, yeah, at a
traumatic
young time,
experiences as a
absolutely.
child, as a young woman.
Yeah.
And to some extent, that was true of my mother too.
Yes.
And so to some extent, I have come to understand that her stoicism, and as she says, that I put a wall around me. And that often was partly based on their own experience.
I think that's really
and
true.
And then on top of it, they're both feminist. So tough love was mainly, I mean, I think that there was this side that as a woman, don't be too emotional because you have to be less vulnerable.
Right, and also that's the stereotype of
Right,
being a woman,
right, exactly.
is that you're emotional
And then you
behave
just fall
emotionally
apart
to
and all of
everything.
that.
And
Right, right.
I think that's also very true.
And it's like the combination of tradition and protection and then tough love.
right.
You know, just
You had this
curiously.
beautiful line in your book about this moment that happened. You said, "My mother had internalized my shame, but could not give me comfort."
Right.
And that's exactly what happened with my mother and my grandmother. And just like it hurt your feelings, although you understood that eventually, it was very similar with because my mother was so hurt by that. It took them a long time. And then it was, at some point, my grandmother actually said to her pretty much what your mother said to you too, was that I wanted your life to be so strong in every way. I did not want there to be any weak link in it.
And for her, she actually said it by saying, you know, I see it in the grandchildren, and I know what they love, what they need when they fall. Is not the first question, how did you fall? It was about, oh, you fell, they just need a hug.
Yeah.
And she could see that, and she could acknowledge that. And that was a big deal, you know? I mean, I think that idea of both of these women being feminist and at the same time part of a culture is such an important part of, I mean, you were reading that poem, which I love, and about the man and the woman, and Preeti did a wonderful dance.
The night, Take Back the Night.
Take Back the
Yes.
Night. And that reminded me of, I mean, Take Back the Night here became very important because of the rapist culture, all of that.
That's why I called it that. It had a different title,
right.
but I wanted it to have that.
But it also
resonance.
became a calling cry when the Nirbhaya case happened. And there's 2012. So my mother is 98. And I was going back and forth because of some work and all that. And I was home and she was determined. She said, how can this happen? The country that we fought for, that we charged. I mean, she was one of the founding members of the first women's organization and was as active in the freedom movement as my father, if not the same way. But, and she kept saying, you got to take me. I need to go to the streets. And all my sisters and my sister-in-law, and they said, you are 60 pounds. That's what she weighed then. She was tiny, and she was ready to go. And so they all told me that, please just explain to her. And what I mean, it was like such a moving moment for me that all I did was just to hold her hand and gently, and I write about that in the book, that she said, you know, bahut saru lage cha. And it's just simply to say, it feels good.
Yeah.
And her face would soften. And you realize that there was that love, there was the emotion, but the feminism in her and the fight was also real.
Right.
But it was not always possible to have both at the same time. You know, that's kind of, in a way, what you realize when you look at these women and the life that they've led. So it's just pretty special. And I think for your mother, it seems like poetry was such an important part of her feminism.
It was.
Even,
It
you know,
absolutely
and that
was.
sort of, it gave her a voice that was so different. And so I would love for you to read, in the introduction, you have something
Yes.
about how she thought of poetry and feminism.
Yeah, she wrote a lot about that actually
Right.
because she felt that poetry was, maybe I'll borrow yours actually, because mine is very tattered, so it doesn't have, maybe I have another one. So yeah, she saw poetry as an essential instrument of freedom for women. And she didn't mean that in terms of sort of highbrow poetry, poetry that was happening in the cities, in highly literate families. That's not what she meant. She meant that there was something about the language of poetry gave power to women. So let me see, there are a few parts. Do you have the part? Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
You can tell. You've read each other's stuff a lot.
Very, very well, yes. I speak for poetry as being central to a woman's freedom. Yes, I am partial. I cannot be and do not wish to be objective in this one respect. It is not only the printed word that spells inner freedom for us women. There are oral songs composed by village women. They sing their own sorrows and anguish. Poetry is a means of our survival. It is a window through which we can breathe. Yeah. And I think that was sort of the principle on which she based her life as a poet. I think she, she translated, she was prolific as a writer, but she also had a mission to translate women poets from all over the world. And that was partly because she believed so strongly in the empowering ability of women's poetry. So, and she wrote in every genre. She was also a political journalist. She wrote novels, she wrote plays, she wrote obviously a lot of academic work. But all of them had this, even her children's literature were feminist. Wow. You know, they were all very much about the rights and power of women and justice.
So speaking of poetry and women, you translated all of this. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you is especially the title, Acrobat. And it seemed to me that, and you dance, and Preeti's danced it so well, that it was as much about the multi-dimensional life that women have, which is almost acrobatic. And tell me why you chose that as the title.
That's such a great question, actually, because, all right, so there's a little story behind it. I translated the poem Acrobat first for a different book, this book. It's called Make Up Your Mind, which I did. It's a bilingual book of translation of her book, Tumi Monosthir Koro. And I translated this on the sly as a birthday present for her when she turned 75. And Acrobat is a poem that's in it. So when I was translating it, as it was a surprise, of course, I couldn't ask her any questions about the rightness or wrongness of choices I was making. So there's a line there. ভেবেছে সে খুব সুন্দর মাদারি খেলা জানে সে is the third person pronoun in Bangla, which is not gender specific, right? So I had to decide whether it would be a he or a she. We weren't doing ze or they in the way that we do now. So I made the choice of it being a she, because to me, as you said, this poem, the acrobat, the tightrope, the images, all of the metaphors seemed to be about the multiplicity of identities that a woman has to balance. So I read it as a feminist poem, and that's how I translated it. So once I gave the book to her, which she incidentally was thrilled to have, I said, but Ma, I had this question, did you write, was Madari, Madari, was your protagonist a man or a woman? And I was stunned by her answer. She said, I wasn't thinking about gender at all when I wrote that poem, because to me, that poem is about the delicate balance that you need to reach as a poet. When you write a poem, when you have a sentence that's too long or a word that's too heavy, you get thrown off the tightrope of poetry, and that's what it was to me about. So I thought, oh my God, so I should bring that in somehow, I should change the translation. She said, no, absolutely not, because this translation works perfectly, and it's a feminist poem too. You just made me see that it also works as a feminist poem, and it doesn't take away from the poem being about creativity. So anyway, so that's how the story happened. But since you bring that up, I wanted to, about the question of multiplicity of identities, the duality of identity. You speak so beautifully about the double consciousness that you felt, both as in terms of the disjunction that can happen between your self-identity and the way the world sees yourself, which you felt when you went back.
Right.
But also, the various, the duality of the life that you live, whether it is as a mother, as a daughter, whether it's as a wife or a scholar. I think all of that was very true for my mother as well, and I would love you to say a little bit about that, because that you write about it very movingly and eloquently in your book.
Well, our time is almost up, so I'm going to be very quick, and then we'll try to get to the next thing. But I mean, the double consciousness, of course, as a phrase is Dubois' phrase. And it occurred to me that for all of us who live in multiple worlds, we have double consciousness. And initially, my experience was that it was disjunctive. It was hard. And I used the phrase, which is a very common Hindi phrase called, sometimes I felt like Dobika kutta nahi ghar ka nahi ghat ka, which literally means a dog that belongs neither to the washerman nor to the river. And that idea that you're nowhere. And now I realize that actually that's a strength. And I just would love to end with that, because all of us are living in the times where there is this kind of a artificial clarity of you only belong to one thing, that if you're for America, you're not for the world. And I think that double consciousness can actually come in handy to deal with the reality of the world, not the artificial clarity of the
I
world.
agree, absolutely.
And I think that is what ultimately what drove me to write this book. And this notion of world as family, which is of course an ancient Indian phrase, it was that idea. And it already feels like this concept is in the rearview mirror, you know. We have to fight hard to bring it back.
keep it alive,
And
yeah.
keep it alive.
Yes. But my mother felt that too very strongly as a woman writer, as a woman artist, as a political activist, as a mother, as a daughter, as a wife, as a professor. I think this need for there to be, for the world to look at you in a binary way. Of course, binary now means something else, but, you know, so she wrote about that as well in her poetry.
So what I'm going to do is ask you to just read one poem.
Okay.
And then we will get to the next,
All right.
last piece.
One poem. Okay, well, maybe I can read a poem about this duality, about double consciousness. Let's see. Maybe I can find it easier here. Page 100. Let's see. Make up your mind. Make up your mind. Who do you want? That woman or me? Within me breathe two people. Make up your mind. Who do you want? That woman or me?
Thank you.
I have a request. I would love you to read, because so much of the way you were talking about your mother, and actually just now when you were telling me about your mother, holding your mother's hand, and how she said that it was feeling nice, and I could see that you were remembering her and you were tearing up. It reminded me of a poem that my mother wrote called Umbilical Cord, and I would love it if you would read that.
Let's see if I can find it in my
I can tell you.
Yes, I got it.
It's 119.
Apologies, we're going to be a little late, but I hope you don't mind. Umbilical cord. You're in so much pain. You're trying to cut the birth knot, but Earth's umbilical cord keeps you tied in twists, tangled like our weak and fearful love. You're trying hard to be born into a different, fearless world, but our restless arms, unshakable like the sacred thread, coil around your neck, a blood-drenched umbilical cord. You will not have the power to leave the womb of this earth and escape freely into a newborn breeze. You will be bound here in pain, in love.
Beautiful. You read that so beautifully.
And we want to come back to the beginning.
Yes. Lost my page here. Okay. The doctor. Like a phantom guarding the hidden treasures of half a century, her two clenched hands hold in their grasp the unconditional promise of asylum. After all these years, the knot is loosening. Released from the ties, one will pass over to the other side, leaving the other a prisoner on this. From the moment of birth, the auspicious exchange of glances sealed the bond. That ever familiar face grows gradually indistinct. A light from beyond flashes upon it, changing its pallor as the vortex of pain spins into a mighty whirlwind, pulling into its twist 50 years of anger, sorrow, frantic, distraught love. Will the umbilical cord be cut now, at last? Has the doctor finally arrived? In poetry, বেঁচে থাকো, ফুটে থাকো, অমোঘ পাসপোর্ট ছবি হয়ে প্রত্যেক লাইনে তুমি জেগে থাকো, আকণ্ঠ তেষ্টার মতো ছাতি ফাটা যন্ত্রণা আমার, ফুটে থাকো, লুকিয়ে থেকো না, যতকাল কবিতায় বাঁচি। Stay alive. Show yourself clearly, like the unfailing passport photo. Stay awake in every line, you, like an unquenchable thirst. Yes, you. The pain that tears my heart apart. Show yourself clearly, like a flower in full bloom. Don't hide from me. As long as I live in poetry. Thank you. I was asked to end with a very short, an excerpt from a very, very short letter to my mother, but I'm going to keep it even shorter. And this is a letter that, the reason why I was asked to read it is because it's, I think it's a letter that daughters, parts of this letter have been written to mothers by daughters for generations. And this is a letter I started writing to my mother when she was alive, and I finished it just after she died. A letter to Ma. It is true I was created in you. It is also true that you were created for me. Maya Angelou. My first semester in college. You arrived in between your conferences, suitcases and admirers in tow. Refusing abundant offers of hospitality in Cambridge, you shared and immediately redecorated the 1.5 rooms assigned to my roommates and me. Every morning, you stood in our line in our noisy dormitory to claim your 3 minutes in the shower. You left after a week, just as I was getting used to finding your hip-length hair in my comb and turning every head in the 1,000-strong Harvard Union, where you swept into dinner with me, gliding in like a queen, like you always did. A few weeks later, we hit midterm exams. I overslept and, in panic, sprinted to the bathroom. As I stumbled onto freezing tiles and fiddled with the cranky knob that spurted cold water for red and boiling for blue, something miraculously familiar caught my eye. A crimson dot of velvet on the narrow gray wall. Your well-traveled bindi, carefully transported from your forehead and placed beyond reach of the spray. In a flash, I could hear your laugh and smell your scent. I could feel the tension in my neck melt into the mist surrounding me. That perfect circle of red gave evidence on that mildewed wall that you would always be there, far away, so close. Although there were unending demands on your time, A few years ago, you had somehow managed to find several days for us to translate together my bedtime book for children, Not Yet. The book is a playful dialogue in rhyme between a mother and a child. A naughty little girl finds countless excuses not to go to bed. The literal Bengali translation of Not Yet is Akonina, but you had laughed your little girl laugh and declared, no, the girl must be much more emphatic. She will say, Ekkunina, Ekkunina. Well, this obstinate daughter of yours kept saying to her mother in the last few weeks, Ekkunina, Ekkunina. Could you hear me, Ma? Not too long ago, I pulled a big blue book from our Kolkata shelf, 365 Bedtime Stories. When I opened it, out fell a red gold rush of leaves, oaks, maples, and ferns collected in London when I was a toddler. One night, as you were reading to me about Tinkerbell, I interrupted you with a technical question. What are fairy wings made of? Butterfly wings, bird feathers, or huge petals? There are all kinds of fairies, you see, you replied, just as there are all kinds of people. Well, do all fairies look like you? I persisted. I don't think so, you smiled. Fairies are very beautiful. But Ma, I protested, you're the most beautiful person in the world. You laughed, much more raucously than Tinkerbell would. Every little girl believes that about their mother, Tumpush. Well, Ma, I've grown up a bit. My world has grown up a lot. I left home as a child and made beautiful friends who became my family. In my work, I've met many beautiful faces, walked with beautiful figures. I've fallen in love with beautiful minds. You grew up too. More books published, many awards won. A few more clashes with your stubbornly loving daughters. Around your eyes, a few more lines celebrating years of full-throated life. More world tours, many with me, when you swept me away with your infectious appetite for discovery. Remember that list we made of unvisited countries that you absolutely had to explore? Wheelchair in tow. We made it to most of the entries on that list. China, Egypt, South Africa, but not Burma. Each time we traveled, you transformed our adventures into provocative essays or best-selling books. And on every trip, we shared even more pleasures together than our plentiful arguments. Yes, we did have fights. I cried when you didn't understand. I begged you not to nag. I yelled at you when I was upset with someone else. I watched in panic as tears welled up in your ever-adolescent eyes. But I am as sure today as I was that night in London that even if you had not been my mother, even if that most precious accident of birth had by rights been the beginning of someone else's story, even if I'd met you in any of your other roles as a poet, professor, painter, friend, or a stranger on a plane, you would still be the most beautiful person I could ever have met. At the end of Not Yet, the daughter asks, Ma, did you turn out the light? And the mother replies, yes, my dear. Now, good night. Thank you.